disagree. Struggle for power. It's a struggle for power between different members of Congress, within the White House, and even on courts of law, right? Congress is made up of 535 individual members. Each of them, just like each of us, take a different approach to government, right? Have different values, right? Have different goals that they think government should be used to achieve, right? So there's a struggle for power within Congress, struggle for power within the White House, struggle for power even in courts of law. The highest court in the land is the U.S. Supreme Court, and if you didn't know, it has 9 justices. Most decisions reached by the Supreme Court are not 9-0. Some aren't. Most of the time, it's 8-1, 7-2, 6-3, 5-4. What does that tell you? There are differences of opinion between the justices themselves. There's a struggle for power on the high court over how cases should be resolved, how the law should be interpreted, how the law should be applied. Struggle for power within the court itself. There's a struggle for power between and among one national government, 50 state governments, thousands of local governments, over who should control what. The Constitution gives us a guideline, but it's kind of a general guideline. And so states and the federal government oftentimes are competing for power, competing over who controls what. So for example, should the federal government set one nationwide marijuana policy? Or should each of the 50 states set their own? I don't know. But they're at odds with each other over that, right? Struggle for power. There's a struggle for power to define our civil liberties. There's a struggle for power to decide the best way to eliminate discrimination and advance civil rights. There's a struggle for power between, what are we now up to, 350, 360 million Americans who have different ideas about politics and government. There's a struggle for power between and among close to a dozen political parties in the United States. It's not just the Republicans and Democrats. There's a Green Party, a Libertarian Party, a Communist Party, a Socialist Party, right? A Constitution Party, I could go on, a Reform Party. They all stand for different things. And they're all organized to try to influence government in different ways. Do you have any idea how many interest groups are in the United States? Let's play a fun game. Pick a number. How many do you think there are? Somebody just throw one out.
5,000.
By the way, good start. Higher.
10,000.
Higher. See, it's a fun game. Higher.
40,000.
40?
Yeah.
Okay, lower.
30,000.
Lower. 30. 20. Around 20. 20 to 25. It varies. Now we're talking about groups that lobby the government at the federal, state, and local level, which is why you got 3 levels of government. So, but and for every group lobbying for something, say a pro-choice interest group, there's what? Pro-life interest group. Struggle for power between and among 20 some odd thousand interest groups who all, right, want different things out of government. Right? There's a struggle for power every election cycle between competing candidates that want your vote, and go on, right? You see, it just permeates everything. And it's natural in a democracy where people are free to reach their own conclusions that we're not going to agree on much. And so the best we can do is to kind of muddle through, kind of keep that in mind, right? Don't judge our system on a perfection scale, right? It's never going to be perfect. It's going to be messy, right? Because we're a diverse, large society, right? What is considered a perfect political system? We can't even agree on that to begin with, probably. So, have a little patience, right, with your system, right? It's the way it's going to be messy. It's going to be sometimes what you want you'll get out of government. Sometimes you won't, right? But that's just the nature of politics in a democracy, right? Where people have the freedom to be themselves and make their own decisions. But that's politics. By the way, I promise I'll do this very rarely, but this is one of the few times where I want you to use this as the definition of politics. This is your books, and I don't like it. Sorry. I'm the teacher, so I get to decide not to use it if I don't want to. I don't want to. Don't worry if I ask you what the definition of politics is on the exam. This won't be one of the answers. I wouldn't confuse you. But this will be on the list, and this would be your correct answer. Okay? All right. We're going to turn our attention now to government itself, and we'll be on this for a while. We won't finish it up today. But before we start any discussion on government, because government is the centerpiece of our political system, let's go through the generic definition of what a government is, and see a government is a constitutionally established institution. Again, words matter. You learned last time the U.S. Constitution creates our federal or national government. You learned last time each state has its own state constitution that sets up its own state government. That's what we mean by constitutionally established. You start with the Constitution creates the government, and you're off running. So governments tend to be constitutionally established institutions that are created to create and implement laws and policies which affect everybody. Right? Now, if something's important, I tend to put it in red, so this is kind of important. There are a lot of powerful forces in your life. There are multinational corporations that wield a lot of power and influence. Global religions, right? There are a lot of things, right? But you only have to take a course on government, on this powerful force in life. And do you know why? Because only government uses force legitimately to back up its decisions. Is Walmart a powerful force in American life? Yes. Can Walmart put me in jail if I don't shop there? No. Compare that with government. Any decision the government makes, the government decisions come in the form of court decisions, rules, and regulations. Once that decision's reached, what? It's backed up by force. Break the law, what happens? They have the legitimate authority to punish you, to apply force, to fine you, to imprison you, depending upon the state and the crime, even to legitimately execute. See, government's different. Everything it does is backed up by force. And the reason that's important to remember is this is why we want to use it judiciously. We want to use it for good, not for ill. Because government is a very powerful force. Whatever the government decides to do, now we're all forced to do it. Or go to jail, or pay a fine, right? Or heaven help us, get executed. You are now forced to obey. So the next time you're pondering what you think government should or shouldn't do, I think the first step we should all pass is, okay, is what I want the government to do, does that justify using force against people? Because every government decision is an exercise of force. It really is. And some things government should use force to do. A lot of things I'm not so sure it should. Right? So, this quote kind of illustrates the point I guess I was trying to make here. Some have attributed it to George Washington, but increasingly I'm seeing that, people are saying George Washington never said this, whatever. So it really doesn't matter who said it. It's a good quote. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. It's like fire. It's a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action. It is like fire. See, fire can be a positive force. It can keep us alive, heat our homes in the winter, cook our food, right? Increase the quality of our life. But use it irresponsibly and what? It can destroy, it can kill. Government's kind of the same way. Governments, historically, there have been some governments in the world that have been nothing but destructive, right? And there have been some governments that have made the world a different place, a better place. Government's not a good or bad, it's how we use it. Right? I guess that's the point. Kind of like fire. So, okay. So now we're going to turn our attention, we're still on the subject of government, we kind of know what it is now. We're going to take this turn because your book does. After kind of discussing what government is, your book lays out what our government does. And this is very general, right? These are just the general functions performed by our government. Your book doesn't do this, but I want to show you the link between your government's list, your book's list, of the functions of our government with what's written in the U.S. Constitution. So let's start with the Constitution first. I have a description here, but is everybody familiar with the preamble to the Constitution? You've been introduced to it before? Okay. Do they still make you memorize it? in grade school or junior high or whatever? Did you have to memorize it? Okay, all right. I can't remember what grade I was in. I remember I was really young, and I remember they made me memorize it, and there were a lot of words in it I didn't understand. And I always thought that was stupid. I'm like, why am I memorizing something? Tell me what it means. That's what's more important, right? But if you didn't know, the preamble to the Constitution is an opening statement. And its purpose is to try to explain why they wrote the Constitution the way they did and what they expect the government will do under this Constitution to help the people, right, so to speak. So this is the preamble. By the way, these first three words are not unimportant. This is where power is supposed to rest under the Constitution. The government, though it has power over us, is supposed to be based on our consent. It is we, the people, right, that are supposed to be in charge, and the government only exists because we consent to its existence and its authority over us, or at least that's the way it's supposed to work. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 3, that means something. But here's what we expect the government to do under the Constitution: establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty. Now, and by the way, I'm going to give you copies of these slides, so I see some of you writing it down, and that's good. And if you still want a copy of this after class, I'll pop it back up for you. But before we forget, notice the functions of our government as listed by your book are just paraphrasing what was first listed in the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. So, for example, one of the things we look to our government to do is to provide for the common defense, or as your book describes it, this comes straight from your book: protection of the citizenry, sovereign territory, and provision for the common defense. So let's think about what this means. Most archaeologists, historians, political scientists, I guess you could throw sociologists in there, all kind of agree, we could be wrong, that the reason the very first government was ever created in human history was for protection. Because if you reason out, right, early human existence, and really not just early, but for really up until almost modern times, human existence was just about survival. I mean, that's all it was. They didn't have grocery stores, they didn't have construction companies to build your home, right? Weather could turn, the prey you use to get your food could not show up that year. Any number of things could happen. There could be famines, there could be all of those, right? And people, it was a struggle to just stay alive. So people had to grow their own food, make sure they had enough to get through the winters, they had to have their own shelter, all these things. And it was tedious, and it was hard work, right? Imagine living without a grocery store. Just imagine that. There's no grocery, you got to get your own food. And think of how much time that would take to get your own food, 3 meals a day, right? Think about it. Just think about how much time that would take. Just that alone. So, reasoned out, look, clusters of people lived together because they were safer that way. And at some point, right, Dan, whoever it was, some person inevitably stood up and said, hey, look, why are we foraging for food and doing all this time, doing all this looking and everything? Let's just go raid the community on the other side of the hill. Let's steal their food. It's easier. And while we're there, let's grab a few of them and bring them back and make them do the work for us, i.e. slavery, right? And here we go, right? And so communities began to look, we got to protect ourselves. We don't want to be raided. We don't want to be enslaved. We don't want our food stolen, right? So they organized for defense. And you know what? Human beings still do it. We just use bigger weapons now, right? There are 170 some odd countries in the world. Virtually everyone, to my knowledge, has a military. Some not worth speaking about, but they all have a military. That still sticks with us, right? Protection against external attack, right? That's what it means by provide for the common defense. Second, preserve order and stability, otherwise referred to in the preamble as ensure domestic tranquility. We not only need protection from external attack, we need protection from attacks from each other inside the country. When large numbers of people live together in a community, conflicts are inevitable. Some people are going to be right? Driven, right? To steal, to assault, to kill, right? And where these things run rapid, no one is free, right? People live in a state of fear, and state of fear is the opposite of a state of freedom. People are afraid to walk the streets at night, leave their home. That's not freedom. You have to be safe. So the other reason that we have government is to watch, keep us internally safe. Now the mechanism we tend to rely on most is the police, law enforcement. And I know there's a lot of discussion about how fair or abusive law enforcement is, but for now, that's what we've got. And if we're going to replace it with something else, we're going to have to decide what it is. But somehow, some way, we've got to ensure that people are safe, right? That there is some semblance of order. Because the opposite or the contrary to that is anarchy and a state of nothing but fear, right? You can't have that. Hence the importance of ensuring domestic tranquility. We also look to government to establish and maintain a legal system. Referenced in the preamble, government helps to establish justice. We kind of talked about this before, but here we are again, get large groups of people together in a society, in a community. Differences are going to arise, conflicts are going to occur. Do we let people resolve their conflicts through force, have them fight it out in the street or shoot at each other, or is it better to create courts of law that will hear the conflicts and resolve them peacefully? That's why we have courts of law. That's why we have a legal system, right? So that we're not left to fight it out on our own when conflicts arise. This is the difference between the lack of civilization and civilization, right? Are these things. Then in the preamble, it also says we look to government to promote the general welfare. And your book describes this as providing services, including public goods. Look, public goods are things the government gives us, paid for by tax dollars, right? By our tax dollars. And we look to the government to provide us with goods and services that the free market's not good at giving us, right? Free market's good at a lot of things. Like, for example, we have an overabundance of food, we have an overabundance of shelter, we got all these things, right? Free market's good at that. But it's not good at everything. There's no incentive in the free market to create a park, unless you can charge people for entering it. But why would you enter a city park? Why'd you pay money to enter a city park downtown? Now, I'm not talking about Disneyland, you know, right? Government creates that, right? Because they don't create it to make money, they create it because it's for the common good, right? So there are some things the government's better at doing, some things the free market's better at doing. And when the government does it, we hope they're doing it to promote the common good, to increase the quality of life, to make life better and not worse. And so you'll notice, right, everything the government does has to be paid for by the government itself, and they do that through our tax dollars. So I'm going to deviate from the book a little bit, and let's talk about this for a minute. There's lots to talk about related to this. This is the federal budget for circa 2023-2024. Now it says 2023, but it's really about 2.5 years old. Now why are we using an older budget? Well, it'll be probably later this year before we have a very clear idea of what the federal budget was for 25. And for 26, it'll take 2028 to know exactly how the money was spent, right? It's a messy business. But you know, it really doesn't matter. Because each year when the federal government decides how to spend its money, right, our tax dollars, it doesn't start from scratch. It takes the budget from the previous year and uses that as the baseline, and then just adds a little bit here, takes a little bit there. So the budget as it appeared back in 2024, I promise, looks very much like the budget of 2026. Any changes to the federal budget are incremental, they're never grand, okay? So this may or may not be perfect, and by the way, I don't know why it's so hard to see. Looks a lot better on the computer. But anyway, what do you notice right off the bat? Where's most of our money going? For those of you who can see it, can y'all see it?
Health and Social Security.
Okay, health, Social Security, defense, and by the way, this little thing right here, interest on the debt. Right, just interest on the debt, because we owe a lot. We're in debt.
Is it a remainder?
And this is what's, after the money spent on all of this, this is what's left literally for everything else. Okay? So I can see it better than you can. I have a computer in front of me, so let me add the numbers up. So health includes Medicare and Medicaid primarily. It includes other things too, but it's government assistance for health care. 28 cents of every dollar the government spends is spent here, 28 cents. 25 cents of every dollar the government spends is on Social Security. So health care and Social Security combined take up 53 cents of every dollar. Over half the budget is spent just in these two areas. Then for national defense, we currently spend about 16 cents of every dollar. Added to these other two, and we're now up to 69 cents of every dollar government spends is on three things. And then if you add interest on the debt, and by the way, this was back in 2023, I've seen figures now, this says I think 9%. I've seen figures now where it's up as high as 14%. We'll split the difference and we'll say it's 11%, and 69 plus 11, you're up to 80 cents of every dollar federal government spends just on these things. And that means it only has 20 cents of every dollar left to pay for everything else. Education, transportation, environmental protection, whatever you want, right? We can go on and on. Law enforcement, right? So, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, right? But we're facing a pivotal point at some point. Delving into this a little deeper, see, some federal spending is what we call mandatory, and some is non-mandatory, right? Mandatory spending includes almost everything in the health care and Social Security pie. Because to receive Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security, you just have to meet requirements. If you meet the requirements under law, you get the benefit. So the government can't cut that. The law says who's eligible for it, and each year more and more people get eligible for it. Right, that's the truth of it. But they have to pay to people, right, what they're eligible for. So this is not something you can tinker with. These are kind of fixed. If anything, they'll go up or down based upon how many people that year are eligible to receive it. And the number of people eligible to receive it's going to go up for reasons I'm going to tell you in just a minute. Now defense we can tinker with. This isn't mandatory. We could cut the defense spending, we could raise it. You know, this is largely contingent on what's going on in the world. And if we have adversaries, and how strong our adversaries are, and what's necessary to do. But nonetheless, this is something they could cut or add or whatever, right? It's not mandatory, it's considered non-mandatory. Interest on the debt is mandatory, right? International financiers who have float the debt, right, want their interest, just like a bank wants an interest on the loan you took out when you buy your car or buy your home, right? They're entitled to it, we gotta pay it. Right? You can't do anything about that, right? And it's growing. It's going to eat up a bigger part of the pie. Our debt is not shrinking, it is growing, right? So it's going to eat up a bigger part of the pie. So already 80% of the debt is taken up by this. And then let's go back to this. For the part of the budget, 53% or 54% of the budget that pays for health care and Social Security, this is definitely going to go up for a variety of reasons. One is, when these were first created, these were largely created back with the New Deal during the FDR administration. When they were created, for every person getting health care assistance or a Social Security check from the government, for every one person getting a benefit, there were at least 13 people in the economy working to pay taxes. 13 people paying in for every one person taken out. Does that make sense? Right? Well, if you do the math, that's keeping us in the black. We'll have a surplus. More people are paying in than taking out. Today, the ratio of taxpayer to recipient is 3 to 1. If the things continue to go as they're going, when you're ready for retirement and you're expecting your Social Security check, which you paid into all your life, it's FICA on your paycheck, right? It's going to be 2 to 1. 2 workers for every one recipient. You see, there's a storm coming, right? And the only way to address this, right, at least as it exists now, is you either increase taxes, which no one will vote for, or you cut spending, which no one will vote for, right? So that's not going to happen. So you all have a vested interest. You want to be rooting on, we need a productive economy. We need more people making more money because that increases the tax base. Does that make sense? Not only that, people are better off. The more people who are out of poverty and move into the middle or the upper class, the better off we are, right? But, you know, there are all these factors working in. Keep in mind too, who's the primary beneficiaries of healthcare assistance and Social Security? The elderly. And the percentage of the elderly is going up, not down, because my generation, your generation, we aren't having kids. We're choosing not to have kids, and we're having fewer kids than, right, we had in the past. So we have fewer workers to make money and pay taxes to pay for an ever larger part of the elderly, right, who rely upon these benefits. I know I expect my Social Security when I retire. I paid in all my life. Damn it, they better get it to me. I'll be pissed, right? And the reason that Medicare exists is to help cover the costs of health care for the elderly, because they need more health care, right? Take a look in your grandparents' medicine cabinet, right? See how many drugs they're on, see how many times they have to go to the doctor. The older you get, the more you need medical assistance, right? And as more people are getting older, and not only that, living longer, that adds to the cost. See, back in the 1950s, when everybody smoked and drank and nobody cared about their health, people dropped dead at a younger age. So they retired at 65, dropped dead at 71. That means they only got their Social Security check for 6 years. Probably they paid more in over the course of their lifetime in taxes than they ever got out, because they were only retired for 6 or 7 years. Now people are living into their late 80s, so they're getting their Social Security check for a longer amount of time, right? Which drives up the cost. I say this jokingly, right? But in a way, the government benefited more when people were dropping dead while they're mowing their lawn and smoking a cigarette and 70 years of age. Government wins because they paid more in than they're ever going to get out. They died too young, right? That makes sense. So I don't know what the answer is, right? I don't know. Again, the way as I see it, we need a growing economy. We need to find out some way to ensure that people, move up the economic ladder. A more prosperous, you need prosperity to have a prosperous benefit system. But only wealthy countries can pay for this. Poor countries can't. Right? Yeah.
Will the interest on the debt ever go down?
Well, no, because the government, what's going on, right? The government's having a harder time raising enough taxes to pay for this, so they keep paying for it, but they're not, right? The amount of money that's coming in versus the amount of money that's going out, right, is widening, is widening with regards to the amount of money going out. And so what they're doing is just printing money and spending it on these things, but that can only work for so long. At some point you get hyperinflation, which is where a loaf of bread is going to cost you $100 because they printed too much money. You can't do it. Some countries have tried, like Venezuela, when Hugo Chavez got into power, well, I'll just print a lot of money and hand it out and everybody will be rich. No, it doesn't work that way. Basic misunderstanding of economics. Once everybody has a lot of money, the money's worthless. Because everybody has it. What makes something valuable? Scarcity. Once everybody has $1 million, it means nothing to be a millionaire anymore. Everybody's a millionaire. Right? So, yes, anyway, just throwing that out there. There you go. You've got decisions to make. I'm just hoping I get my Social Security. By the way, one of the ways they've tried to address this is they kept raising the Social Security age, the age at which you receive your full allotment of Social Security. So my father retired, I think, at 65. I have to work till I'm 67 before I get my full allotment of Social Security. They'll probably raise that to 70, 72 for you guys. Looking 40, 50 years ahead, right? Based upon the number crunch. Now again, you got to factor into that. People do live longer. So being 70 is now the new 60 or whatever. So sorry to be bad news, but there it is, right? Facts are what they are. You can't act like they don't exist. They exist, right? And rather than sticking our head in the sand, we need to be doing something. Now we need to decide how we're going to address this. We live in a mostly prosperous, peaceful society. It's just real easy to act like things will always be the way they are, right? They'll never change. Everything will be fine, right? But history's replete with countries just collapsing, right? Wealthy countries, right? Collapsing. No empires have lasted forever. No democracies lasted longer than 200 years. We're the oldest democracy in the history of the world. They tend to have a very short lifespan, right? So what we do with our government matters. It really matters, right? It's going to determine your future, mine too. Okay? Last but not least, we also look to the government to secure the blessings of liberty, what your book calls protecting the rights of the people. And that includes our civil liberties and civil rights, which we'll cover in chapters 4 and 5. All right, you've done good. Let's just cover one other thing, okay? And it's this slide and the next slide. And then that's a good place to break, because I like to spend a lot of time on types of governments by scope of power. But first, to place everything in context, we're still talking about government. We defined what it is. We've looked at the general functions of our government. We've looked at the looming budget crisis, right? Let's now try to better pin down exactly what type of government we have, and your book calls our system of government a constitutional democracy. I think it's a good term. By the way, constitutional democracy means the same thing as a republic. So I don't know about you, but whenever I tell anybody I'm interested in politics or whatever, I must have heard this 100 times in my life. Well, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. And that is, by the way, correct. So we don't live under a democracy. We live under a democracy based on the rule of law. And that's different than just a democracy. In just a democracy, we would just vote on everything. And there wouldn't be any supreme law. We would just decide what the law is, issue by issue. We just all gather together and vote, right? But a constitutional democracy, right, sets legal guidelines for, supreme guidelines for how we're going to exercise our democracy. So that's what we call a constitutional democracy. It's democracy under the supreme law of the Constitution. And I'll explain why that's preferable to just a flat-out democracy here in just a second. But anyway, that's what we're working our way toward. And I think one of the first steps in understanding what our government looks like is to compare it with what other governments in the world either have or look like today. And political scientists tend to typologize governments in either of three categories. So one way you can compare and contrast or categorize different governments in the world is by who rules. Another way is by how power is distributed within the government itself. We won't cover that today. In fact, we won't get to that until we get to chapter 3. But in some countries, they have a unitary system. That's how they distribute power within the government. There are no governments in the world right now that are a confederation, but we once were in our history. And then there's federalism, and that's where we are. We divide power within our government between one national government, 50 state governments, thousands of local governments. That's federalism. And that's the focus of chapter 3, and we'll get there when we get there. On Thursday, we'll talk about how governments differ based on how much power they wield over society. That's what distinguishes a totalitarian system from an authoritarian system from constitutional democracy. By the way, when we talk about totalitarianism, that's why I want to spend a whole class on it. We'll talk about communism, Nazism, classical liberalism, all the major isms that have really driven politics from the 20th century to present. But we'll get to that. What we're going to finish up with today is just looking at this one category, right? How to categorize governments based on who rules. And this coincides with your book. Your book does this too. But your book relied upon Aristotle to set this up, because this is what Aristotle initially wrote in his famous work, Politics. And in that work, he said, governments in the world tend to either be ruled by the one, the few, or the many. And the many means the people themselves. But what he did is took it one step further. He said there are legitimate forms of rule by the one, few, and many, and there are illegitimate forms. So he said legitimate rule by the one, he called a monarchy. You've all heard that term. This is where it comes from. A monarchy is where you have rule by the one person rules the political system, and they do so in the interest of everybody. A good king, a good monarch, right? Who rules in the interests of their subjects. The opposite of rule by the one for the many, however, is tyranny. A monarch or a king who rules in their own interests rather than the interests of the people. You've all heard the term tyrant or tyranny. This is where it comes from. It's bad rule by the one. You don't want to be ruled by a tyrant. You want to be ruled by a monarch. It's a difference. Rule by the few in the interests of everyone, he called aristocracy. Rule by the few in the interest of themselves, bad rule by the few, he called oligarchy, right? And then this is the part that should interest us most, because this is what we're supposed to have, rule by the many, rule by the people. But notice how he typologized these. He called rule by the people in the interests of everyone a polity, good rule by the people. But look what he labeled bad rule by the people, illegitimate. He called it a democracy. So I don't know if you realize this or not, but for most of human history, democracy was a dirty word. Because there can be rule by the many, there can be an illegitimate, a bad form of rule by the many. Basically what it is mob rule. It's the masses run amok. No laws, no rules, just the strong consistently overtaking the weak. People being pulled out of their homes, beaten, stolen from, right? Is it the Batman trilogy, right? Batman 3. Remember? Remember Bane? Do as you wish. No one will stop you, right? People are in charge now. The people just go out and do whatever you want, right? That's a nightmare, by the way, because no one's safe. It's nasty, brutish. Everyone's life is short because you're eventually going to get it in the back when there is no law, when there are no rules, right? Sure, you'll be able to steal from your neighbor, but he'll be stealing from you at the same time you're stealing from them. Right? It's a terrible way to live. It's a state of fear and chaos, right? By the way, he said living under this is worse than living under a tyrant or an oligarch. Because at least here you have order, right? This is just chaos, mob rule. So with the French Revolution, which was one of the first global revolutions that overthrew a monarchy, right? The people who supported the monarchy, who opposed the revolution, labeled the revolutionaries Democrats. They're like, you just want to depose the king and you're going to replace it with mob rule, right? We need a king to maintain order. We need the church to maintain morality. And if you tear those down, human beings are going to be left without a compass, right? They're just going to go wild. And in a way they did. There was a reign of terror following the revolution that was very miserable to live under. It was kind of like mob rule. And what happened? How did they move past mob rule? The mob rule is when they were cutting everybody's heads off, right? No one was safe. Napoleon. Why did Napoleon rise to power? When you're in a state of chaos, you want someone to come in, right? Someone come in and restore order. I want to be safe again. That's why Napoleon came to power, right? He promised to restore order. And he did, and almost took over Europe in the process. Right? But anyway, today we use the term democracy positively. It means the opposite of rule by the one or rule by the few, rather rule by the many. And what we've learned is the way the people can rule themselves is under well-defined, constitutionally established rules. The Constitution will establish, right, what the rules are under our rule by the people. So it won't be mob rule. It won't be mass chaos. There are rules in place that we all have to follow, right, set by the Constitution. Constitutional democracy. Right? He said this was the worst form of government to live under. He also said establishing a just or legitimate rule by the people themselves was the most difficult type of government to set up and to operate. And in doing so, he said, look, Democracy is only going to work, rule by the people is only going to work if certain things are in place. What do you think those are? And by the way, you know this too, because your government, since World War II, has from time to time tried to prop up democracies throughout the world. Some of them took hold and flourished. Some didn't work. Why? Why do democracies work some places and in other places they fail? What's necessary in a society for democracy to flourish? Because that's an important question, because if there are certain things that have to be in place, and we can see those things are crumbling right now, our democracy is endangered, because democracy rests upon certain pillars. And if those pillars weaken, democracy weakens as well. What do you think they are? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Everybody being able to have their own opinion.
Okay, yeah, individual freedom is the cornerstone of democracy, right? We're supposed to have a wide range of privacy and personal space, control of our own destiny. I agree with that. That's something that you need in place for you to have a democracy, right? And that's my fault. So I guess what I'm asking, what has to be in place before democracy or what? Where people have a lot of individual freedom, that's usually a cornerstone of, you got yourself a democracy there. But that's different from saying, what shores up a democracy? What helps to ensure a democracy will be successful? Well, a lot of study on this. It goes all the way back to Aristotle. There are a couple of things. One is, and it's proven kind of true, you need a relatively wealthy society. I don't know if any of you have grown up in really destitute poverty. I'm fortunate I didn't, but I didn't grow up wealthy either. I have friends. I'm telling you, when people are desperately poor, what that generally means is, right, they're looking for food and shelter, right? And so in countries that are desperately poor, those people don't really care about freedom of speech or freedom of press. They wonder where their next meal's coming from. They wonder if they're going to have a place to sleep that night. And so that has to be fixed first. There has to be a baseline of prosperity where people with the basic needs of society have been fulfilled. People have enough food, people have enough shelter. It's only when people have enough food and shelter we can turn our attention to luxuries like freedom of speech and freedom of press. Those don't matter much if you don't know where your next meal is coming from. You get it? So that has to be first. Poor countries generally produce bad democracies, right? Not because poor people are bad, but because they have basic needs that need to be addressed first, right? And that's why you look at every functioning democracy in the world, they all tend to be relatively prosperous societies that go together. So now you kind of get where I'm going at. So you can think of anything else? Well, I kind of agree with this. Some have argued, I kind of agree with it, that society needs a right kind of personality. There's such a thing as a democratic personality, not as in the party, but as in the system. What is a democratic personality? What is a personality of a society conducive to democracy? Well, people that understand you have to be tolerant of opposing views. You have to understand your side's not always going to win. You have to be willing to bargain, accommodate, and compromise with people who want different things from government than you do. Some countries have people with that personality, some don't. A lot of it has to do with history. But where there's a history of factions of people hating one another, not just disagreeing with one another, but hating one another, they can't bargain. They can't accommodate, they can't compromise. That's the essence of a democracy. So there are these old tribal or religious or ethnic conflicts, not going to work. And that's what kind of worries me about modern society. We're increasingly tribalizing based on our political views and looking at the other tribes not as people with differences of opinions, but fundamentally terrible people. That's the first step to this kind of tribal division. When you begin to see people who are different than you as less worthy than you are, they're terrible people. It's a short step from there to start shooting and killing them. You're all familiar with the Hutus and the Tutsis and Rwanda? These people live together, two tribes, historical tribes, live together peacefully. They kind of had a peaceful society, and among other things, they had this idiot who got on the radio, and I can't remember from which tribe he was from, But he started getting on the radio and calling members of the other tribe leeches and cockroaches. He was very popular, and he kept encouraging his tribe to go out and kill them. And at some point they did. It's terrible. You had people living side by side. They were neighbors, good friends, and they're showing cameras going down the street, and there are bodies in the yards. One tribe grabbed their machetes and hacked to death the other. Yeah, the UN went in, and it was so dangerous the UN left. It was too dangerous for the UN to even keep peace. Yeah, they estimate about 1 million people were killed, and they weren't killed with firearms. They were killed with machetes, hand to hand. That's what happens when this hatred and vitriol is. That's what it's creating. It's doing it. It's creating it. Don't be sucked into that. But that's not conducive to democracy, right? That's conducive to a slaughter. By the way, there's nothing worse than an ethnic war. Because when wars are based on ideology, then we want to conquer you and impose our ideology on you. We'll let you live. But ethnic wars are about what? My group eliminating your group from the face of the earth. Nothing's bloodier than that, right? Because that's the goal. I'm not going to rehabilitate you. I'm not going to absorb you. I want you gone, right? And you got people on social media saying this exact same thing, right, about others who are different. I would be very concerned about this, right? This is poisoning political discourse and the basis for a healthy democracy. This is not the way it's supposed to operate. Anything else? Oh, Aristotle says, proven kind of true, you need a relatively well-educated society. It's hard for the people to govern themselves if they don't know about anything. They're misinformed. They don't understand how an economy works. They don't understand how government works. How are we supposed to make important decisions on that? Right? Which is why use your time in college, learn. Learn about everything. It all matters. It all goes into the fabric of who we are as a society, right? You're in a better position to make decisions for yourself the more you know, and you're in a better position to make decisions for society if you know what the hell you're talking about, right? And not just relying upon what someone else tells you, right? Learn, learn, learn. Right? Aristotle said that. Ignorant societies don't make for good society, don't make for good democracies. So this all helps to explain why democracy has tended to be the exception throughout history rather than the norm. It's, if these two systems are a Model T, this is a Ferrari. It's a delicate, right? And by the way, like I said, we're the oldest democracy in the world, right? We've already beat the odds. We've lasted longer than any other. But it also pretends maybe our time is drawing near. History would tell us we've exhausted our luck, right? Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully every generation will do its thing to keep our democracy alive, and better yet, to make it better. So, okay, do you mind if I put this on your desk? People are going to gather around. Do y'all have any questions? You've done really good. Again, give me out early, right? Give me out 25 minutes early. I'll keep trying to do this. My job is to get through a certain amount of material, and if I can do it in a shorter class period, I will. No reason to keep you here longer than you have to. So. Okay, guys, have a good day. I'll see you on Thursday. Don't forget about your responsibilities. Stay on top of them. Have questions, let me know. all the slides for the chapter material at one time. I just haven't quite finished the chapter one slides. But once I get them finished, then I set a date. Thank you. Set a date for myself to be done. So,
All right, perfect.
Yeah, no problem. It's okay. Idiocracy. You know, I keep confused. Which one is that? Is that the Bill Maher?
I have no idea what it is, but it's one of the things that got frozen in time.
Right.
And then they got frozen, they're supposed to be frozen for 20 years ago.
Okay.
They got frozen for 5 years ago. And when by the time both of them woke up, the one dude was like the smartest guy on earth. And everyone was incredibly stupid. And the thing that he had to do was, he was the only person who got the answer correct. One question, and he became president. He was smarter than everybody else on the planet.
I'll have to
Because everyone else started to
I
have
know I've heard of it, and I know I've heard good things about it. I always get confused that Bill Maher did a documentary that I saw one time, and it was on something kind of, he went around just asking people questions, you know, and it was called something like, the name was very similar, but his was just kind of portrayal of, not stupidity, but ignorance. Those are two different things. You know, stupidity means you can't learn, ignorance means you just haven't learned. Yeah, you're unaware of facts or whatever, but anyway, he kind of did a canvassing of the country and.
Yeah, I think
Just-
that movie was the movie where they, Crocs wasn't a big thing when they made that. So they were like, oh yeah, these look like idiot shoes, and then the movie made Crocs popular.
They are comfortable.
This mic was
Oh, okay, all right, well, welcome to the class. Okay, the good news is, as you kind of heard, we slow walked through chapter
Yeah,
one.
I read the syllabus and stuff
Excellent.
on Canvas.
Okay.
I just wanted to like confirm about buying the McGraw-Hill book. I will do that tonight.
Okay, and you have choices, by the way. If you go to the, I think if you just go to the bookstore site, there should be the choice of buying a hard copy with a code. You need that code, you need that number. Which is more expensive than if you just buy it. If you just buy the code, you get the same thing. The only thing you don't have is a hard copy of the book.
So I should buy one copy.
Well, no, because what I'm saying, I buy the code, it's cheaper.
Okay.
And then what the code
Yeah, 'cause I
does.
saw it was like 80 or like 90 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
The book I think is over 100. I could be wrong, maybe it went down. But I know the code's cheaper because you're not buying the book.
Okay.
But if you just buy the code, see, once you have the code, whether it's bundled with the book or you just buy it standalone, it gets you access to McGraw-Hill, which has an electronic copy of the book.
Yes.
So you don't have to have the hard copy.
Okay.
So I would probably buy the code. Excuse me, sorry.
definitely work.
Time now is approximately 3 p.m. Today is Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.